Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Watson Marketing's webinar, The New Marketing Reality, Capitalizing on Opportunities to Build Better Customer Experiences. In this webinar, we'll get to hear from Jeremy Waite. He's an all-around amazing guy, and when I can honestly say he knows his stuff, and it's amazing what he's doing with some of the capabilities of Watson. I'm going to put that out there just because he's that on. But before we begin, I wanted to cover a few items. If you'd like to tweet along with us today, please use the hashtag ThinkMarketing. So that's hashtag ThinkMarketing, all one word. A copy of today's presentation will be emailed to you after the webinar. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webinar, and we encourage you to ask questions, you can click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. We typically try to leave about 10 minutes, but if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you by email after. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the help widget. And with that, I get to turn it over to Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John. And thanks for everyone for dialing in. It's just after 7 o'clock in London. Really appreciate your time. I know it's difficult. Everyone's super busy. Some of you may be multitasking while we're doing this. We have the report, which we're making available to you as well. But let me just start by really letting you know how this came about. We're going to take about 50 minutes. I'm going to fly through some of the stuff. This isn't the normal kind of webinar that we would often give. Often we have lots of case studies. We have lots of stories, big slides, and lots of pictures, and they're very visual. This is a slightly different one because we're in a pretty tricky place from a marketing perspective. You know, the world's changing really, really fast. I often joke that the world is probably going to change more over the next few years than it has over the last 15 or 20. I've made cases for that in some of the past IBM webinars that we've done. But really what happened is whenever I make some of those cases, I start to use other people's data. And you all know, we can all skim data, we can kind of mix it up and we can make it mean whatever we want to mean. You could take the same number, give it to two totally separate people, they'll come up with completely different stories and hypotheses. There's a beautiful quote from Winston Churchill. He used to say, the only data you can trust are the statistics you falsified yourself. I was keen that we have some solid research, that we knew where it came from, that we knew it was the right people asking the right kind of questions with no agenda, no bias, it wasn't skewed in any particular way. And also, if we knew that that base was solid, we'd actually see really what is the heartbeat of the marketing industry. Is it changing that fast? Or actually, are we still struggling with the fundamentals? So that's essentially how this piece came around. We went out, we surveyed over 1,000 different marketers. The majority of them were from across Europe and North America. There was a lot of marketers from the UK. And often, and we can cover this in the Q&A if you guys are interested, I often like to think sometimes that in marketing there's a line if you went from the West Coast and you kind of drew it across the world as you're going across Western Europe and then you're going to go across Eastern Europe over to APAC. You've almost got a level of maturity within marketing where maybe the UK sometimes is 18 months behind the US. You might have pockets of marketers maybe sometimes around Indonesia or around Tel Aviv or in the Nordics up in Sweden that are super advanced, but then as you move into Spain, Italy, for example, people are a little bit further behind. So what we wanted to do was try and create some research that just looked at exactly where the industry is, what is it we should worry about, and what are these trends that we're going out across in 2017. And I'm particularly proud of this report because it's the first piece of research that's come out from Watson Marketing as well. So that's nice. You can see my Twitter handle there. Feel free to drop any comments or abuse or debates. We can continue the conversation afterwards. You've got my email address on there as well. Listen, let me just kind of start off. I just want to take 5 minutes just to look at really where the industry is at the moment, then we're going to jump into the research because there's a lot of people looking at the industry from lots of different perspectives. I'm an evangelist, so I get the chance to go and travel around different conferences. I speak with keynotes. I go and spend a lot of time with analysts who have also got a different view of the world and looking at the researchers of what they think. IBM has a perspective as well, and we've got this engine called Watson. We're certainly not going to try and sell anything to you today or look into the product at all, but we have this big belief that we're marketing in the cognitive area. Essentially what we mean by that, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with Watson, the cognitive system that we have that really underpins Watson marketing now. It's this cognitive system that can learn. We're going to look at artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence later on. We're going to look at this machine learning technology. And what exactly does that mean for marketers when we're looking at automating things? If you've got a system that can think, and if it can learn over time, ultimately, really, if you imagine playing that out, we're really talking about a marketing platform that could ultimately build itself. So that has all kinds of different connotations, and there's lots of things that we can look at with that. Obviously, it raises a lot of questions, has a lot of questions around ethics and morals as well. So we're going to look at some of that today. But that's really where IBM's coming from, because we at the moment have this unique position in the marketplace where we're probably about 18 months ahead of everybody else with this cognitive system. So whilst we've got a cognitive system on one side that is super advanced, we may find that we've got marketers on the other side that are sometimes miles behind. Now, this is what Gartner do. I screen grabbed this from a webinar that they did recently. This is the 2016 hype cycle for digital marketing and advertising. And really the hype cycle, for those of you unfamiliar with it, it's based upon the law of diffusion of innovation. It's that shape where you get people very excited about technologies on the left. This is all the kind of stuff that you read about in Fast Company and Wired and Fortune. You see it at the conferences. Everybody wants to talk about the different types of programmatic and customer journey analytics. But sometimes we get seduced by those shiny things. Happens in marketing all the time. Then it falls off a cliff because we can't figure out the ROI. We can't do our attribution properly, or we can't figure out how to justify it perhaps to our bosses, especially people outside of marketing. And then what will happen is it slowly flattens off, which Gartner call it the slope of enlightenment, and that's where things start to get mature. It's where they start to make money and show economic value and a return to the business. Now, what's interesting about this, and we'll look at this later on, the things that we've been doing in marketing for a long time, email's just fallen off because that's so mature now, but you'll see personalization. That's quite easy. It's the right message to the right person at the right time when I've got all of your information. We can look at real-time bidding. We can start targeting people when we have all of their data. That's easy. But what does it mean in 2017 if people don't want to share their data? You can see on the left-hand side there, real-time marketing is still one of the most important technologies most likely to mature over the next 10 years. We've been talking about real-time marketing for quite a while. It's nothing new. What you're seeing entering this as well is general-purpose machine intelligence. Again, one of the biggest trends most likely to impact the industry over the next 10 years. For that, essentially, you're thinking about Watson marketing or a cognitive system that's going to help you be a better marketer. But the key for me is this idea of personification. It's a great term. You should Google it and have a look around if you don't know what it is already. Personification is almost the opposite of personalization. And what that means is, how do we give the right message to the right person at the right time when we don't have their data? I don't know your email, your mobile. I might not know demographics about you. How do we still give a compelling customer experience? When you think about things like you buy a brand new computer from the Apple Store, you get home, you open it up, you go into Safari, you may go on Google, and you may type in a search term, you may be looking for something. The second you type in that search term and press enter, Google knows over 50 things about you. Can start to make assumptions over the type of things it might want to talk to you about, or the type of inquiries and products it might want to show you, the type of results it gives you back. This idea of personification is something that's we're going to look at this shortly, but one of the biggest trends by far. We'll look at what that means in a second. I reluctantly put this slide up because I'm sick to death of seeing it, but it still explains why the industry is in the mess that it is in. This is Scott Brinker, one of my favorite people in the advertising and marketing industry, chiefmartech.com, fantastic blog. 3,976 different vendors, many of them claiming to do almost exactly the same thing. If you look back to 2015, there was about 1,800. 2014, 1,000. When he first did it in 2011, it was just over 100. There was about 150 different vendors. It's almost been doubling every single year. It's no wonder that it's getting harder and harder to do our jobs as we try and figure out which technology should we piece together. Should we buy marketing clouds? Should we buy point solutions? Should we work with system integrators? Where does our data live? And how do we plug it together? So I thought, marketers get excited about things. We look at shiny, shiny. We like that. We like all the new cool things. So what happens if we look at the hype cycle that has less emotion attached to it? Let's look at the one that the IT guys put together, the CIOs. This is the hype cycle for emerging technologies. What's the top trend most likely to mature that people are most excited about at the moment? No surprise, cognitive expert advisors, machine learning. So this is the state of the world that we're in at the moment. When you think back to that Chief Martech slide that you've probably seen 1,000 times, this is the new version which you may not have seen around machine intelligence. And already you're seeing that there's 200 and something logos on that slide. In fact, if you look on my Twitter, @JeremyWaite, I just tweeted a link to the blog that this came from. Already it's getting completely out of hand, and it's totally overwhelming. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, and it's a reason why when I've looked at research in the past, the biggest statistic that I saw last year was as you've got this bun fight for people's attention and you've got marketers going out trying to do their jobs better, it was PwC that looked at a lot of senior marketers, and what they were looking at was that 4 out of 5 executives were overwhelmed and underprepared for the challenges their business was going to face over the next 5 years. In a place where marketers are pretty scared and we don't know what to measure. And we still don't know kind of which channels we should be spending all of our time on. So that's why as we start to look into this report now, I wanted to see, is that actually true? Or maybe are you underestimating marketers and the maturity of the industry, especially when many of us have been in it for quite a long time? But when you think about AI, you think about machine learning, I love this quote that Seth said recently at the bottom. If you wait until there's a case study in your industry, you waited too long. A lot of this stuff that we're talking about is still brand new. And I think, we're going to look back in a few years' time to 2016, 2017, and it's going to feel like the Wild West when we all had no idea really what was going on and how to make sense of it and how to join all of this information together and make sense of the data. This is in a world where the average attention span is 5 seconds. 5-second attention spans. There was some research done for Trump's campaign, and they were looking at what the average attention span of the American public was, and it was just under 5 seconds. The same research for Obama, I think, was 8. I think Clinton was 18. When they first did it in 1960 for JFK, for the first televised debate with Nixon, average attention span was 42 seconds. It's getting harder and harder and harder for us to do our jobs now when we've got to tell our stories and get our message across in these 5-second chunks. So that was just a little tiny bit of background. So we've got about 40 minutes where we're just really going to fly through some of these slides. I'm not going to dwell too much on the data. It's going to get incredibly heavy. Like I said, you're all welcome to read the report and look into it in more detail afterwards. But this is based upon an online survey that we did. I worked with eConsultancy, fantastic agency, very credible. They've got people that they can go to, and it was they solicited a response where people volunteered. And they spent time filling in what was quite a complicated, cohesive questionnaire full of all sorts of different data sets, and they chose what it was that they could answer. There was no incentives whatsoever, so there's no bias. These aren't IBM customers necessarily. These are across the landscape. So I wanted to try and keep this as objective as possible. And I think what we'll find as we get towards the end is that, delivering great customer experience isn't this constant across the industry, and that's going to change from sector to sector, brand to brand. There's going to be certain constraints. We're going to see that customers have certain expectations, but we'll also see probably that the beginner brands and the advanced brands, in some cases, are miles apart, even in technologies that have been around for a long time within marketing. So it'll be interesting to see what you guys think of that as well. It's still going to come down to some common things. We've got to understand our customers. We've got to figure out how to solve their problems. If somebody puts something into a basket, virtual or otherwise, we want to be able to figure out how we can deal with them exactly where they left off. We want to look at loyalty and exactly what that means. And my takeaway, and we'll tie this up at the end when you've seen some of the data, is really these 3 big shifts that we're going through. Gartner talks about this. Forrester said something very similar. IBM has a strong point of view in this as well. We're going to talk about dark social. And we're going to talk about how in some cases social media as it used to be used doesn't work anymore, which is quite provocative. It's the argument around social media for customer service instead of acquisition. Now let's have a look at what that means and why customer behavior is changing so quickly. We know 80% of data is unstructured. 90% of all the data in the world has been created in the last 12 months. This is equivalent to about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data that have been produced every single day. Think about that for a second. That's a company the size of Google is now being created every 24 hours. So the digital universe is going to be 40 times bigger by 2020. In real terms, what that means when you look at connected devices, by 2020, there's going to be 1 million devices added to the internet every single hour. 1 million per hour. We're going to be in a place, ladies and gentlemen, where we're not just going to be marketing to people, we're going to be marketing to machines and marketing to algorithms. And we're going to want our pieces of content to be picked up by those algorithms. We're already seeing it in some places. You've got even the basic algorithms on Netflix. You know, the landscape's going to change dramatically. And like we saw with the marketing technology landscape, what we're already seeing, and Scott Brinker talks about this, 53% of brands are buying the wrong things with the wrong mindset because they're pointing at the wrong problems. So that's why I think some of this research is so important, just to try and help, not just, you know, entertain and inspire you guys with some good stuff, but to really try and educate and inform you about where the biggest challenges are. But even for the most senior people in the room, you know, you're not on your own. You may think that you should be very advanced, but actually it's okay that you don't know the answer to a lot of these things. You're still struggling with the most basic things. If there was just one slide that summed up where our biggest problems lie, I think it would be this one. I find this absolutely staggering, actually, and it was the one that I was most interested in looking at. So the revenue split between customer acquisition and retention. As you look through all of these slides, what you're going to see is you're going to see the two different color codes. Sometimes they're going to be split just on two data sets. Sometimes it's going to be split between brands that see themselves as beginners, kind of very early adopters, very immature marketing teams, versus the very advanced teams or enterprise teams. That's not to say that the advanced teams actually are advanced. It may just be that they're a big team. They think they're doing the right thing, but maybe they're not necessarily. And what we're seeing here is a typical case in point. We're seeing that brands are still spending more time trying to acquire customers than look after the ones they've got. And I find that quite amazing, really. I mean, in fact, if you look at the data here, I remember when I started in the marketing industry in the 90s, there was an assumption it was 7 times cheaper to keep a customer than to get a new one. And really what we're looking at now, I thought it would be fascinating to see if that is still the case. I know that some analysts last year said it's about 6.7 times cheaper to keep a customer than get a new one. These insights haven't changed for 20 years, and yet we're still seeing marketers spending more time on acquisition than retention. Of course, we're seeing the beginner brands and the smaller challenger brands, the slightly immature teams are spending a lot more time focused on acquisition. But even the mature ones that you're seeing on the right-hand side there, they've got an equal focus on acquisition and retention. Shouldn't that be skewed much more heavily towards loyalty? You know, shouldn't we be getting away from just buying people's attention just for that transactional click or the quick sale? Well, we'll have a look at that a little bit more later on, but it really just sets up this idea, and I love this quote. We were joking before with John, you know, we can't have a good deck without President Underwood. I love the quote, you can't purchase loyalty. It's like that battle between click to buy and click to share, and we're still going straight down the road of trying to buy people's attention instead of looking at exactly what do they want and why do they want it, what's their intent, how do we build up trust first, knowing that trust is now very, very fragile and people don't want to give as much of their data. You can't purchase loyalty, but yet what we're seeing, and we've seen this in the results, and you'll see these results in a lot more detail. We're only taking some highlights today. You'll see that people are still spending all of that time basically trying to buy people's loyalty. And we know that you can't do that. You can't buy a relationship. You've got to build that. No different than your friends, your colleagues, when you start a new job. How exactly do we build out that trust and give people some value before we ask them to buy stuff? So this is really one of the trends, you know, 6 to 7 times cheaper to keep a customer than acquire a new one, even though what we're seeing in the marketplace is people are still spending too much time on acquisition. I encourage you guys, if you feel that that is you should maybe get in a room, start looking at the value of your most loyal customers versus the customers that you've just bought in, and start mapping out that lifetime value properly. We'll start looking at that later on as well. And it reminded me of a really nice little trend. IBM has a conference called Amplify. We had one a few months back in London. We're going to have one in Vegas in March. You should absolutely come to it if you get the chance to. The top performing trend at Amplify was Tinderization. And I said it jokingly from the stage, but really it was that idea of transactional relationships. So you can read into that what you will. Of course, a transactional relationship, you all know what that means when you're on Tinder and you're trying to figure out where that hookup may be coming from. But, I'm joking. There's 16,000 Tinder swipes a second in 2017. But think about this from a loyalty point of view. I went and asked some of our customers, how are you finding loyalty? How are you finding it when people are dropping things in a basket and purposely leaving your website because they know that they might be retargeted the next day by you or one of your competitors with a better deal? So that idea of loyalty, that it's much cheaper to keep a customer than get a new one, even that is becoming transactional now. So it's getting harder and harder to be loyal because, think about when you see your friend on Tinder for the first time, they're swiping through, at 1,000 miles an hour, swipe right, especially the guys. And you may find that perfect person. They've been matched with your Facebook likes. You can see the age. You can see the photos. You hope they're real. And you can see the profile. It looks like that's a perfect match. You match up. You could have a chat. But what happens? What is human nature when you start doing that and you have that connection and that spark of a relationship may be there? You still just swipe a couple more times. I've seen so many people do this. It's fascinating. A better offer, somebody else a little bit hotter might be a couple of swipes away. And I'm joking, take this with a pinch of salt. Well, we're seeing exactly the same thing in loyalty. People have still got this transactional view to loyalty now because they know everyone's fighting for their attention. It's more important than ever to build trust and solid relationships. There's some great insights behind this that we found from the research, and one of them was showing that if you're the loyalty leader, on average you will grow twice as fast as your market. Loyalty leaders have a 15% cost advantage, and just a 5% increase in customer retention can generate a 75% increase in profitability. Let me just say that last piece again. Loyalty leaders have a big cost advantage, that's fine, but a 5% increase in customer retention can generate a 75% increase in profitability. Now, faced with statistics like that, why would you spend so much time trying to acquire new customers all the time instead of building and nurturing and loving the ones that you've already got? So it's a fascinating trend, I think, that underpins a lot of the data that we've seen. We talk about customer journeys, and you've all seen different types of customer journey maps. There's some fascinating insights that I heard from Google last year, and I thought this would be interesting to look at in the research as well. Let's have a look at customer journeys. And the B2B side of Google, they were talking about how when people were making basic purchasing decisions, they told me that customers cross on average 5 different channels or devices. And I went back, I had a look at some of the case studies from some of the best customers that we have at IBM, the one that are having the most success across different channels where they're trying to get this single view across all different channels and build them all together, get this single view of the customer. And there was one common thread that I saw, and it was that when it comes to customer journeys, the attitude of the companies, the brands that were the most successful, was that we will speak to our customers on their preferred channel, not on the ones that we think they should engage with us. We're doing email campaigns, so you must respond to our emails. This is how do we speak to our customers on their preferred channel. Now, in order to do that successfully, obviously we need to understand what that preferred channel is. So let's just flick through a couple of slides quite quickly, just looking at the customer journey and looking what was our insights from that, from the 1,000 mid-level to senior marketers that we spoke to. Well, we're seeing that with beginners, there's lots of missing parts. Only 7% had a thorough understanding of the customer journey. Isn't that crazy? And, customer insight analytics, you might have picked it up on that Gartner graph at the beginning. These are trends, these are technologies that have been around for quite a long time, and the technology's been in place for years to be able to do this. This is what Watson Marketing does. This is what a lot of marketing clouds are trying to do, piece together those customer journeys and understand as you cross those channels and devices where are your customers going and why. Only 7% of the industry, it looks like, have a thorough understanding. And you're seeing there 51% limited, but lots and lots of missing parts. Essentially what that is saying is that the majority of people are still very, very poor at measuring them, and they're still in silos. They've still got a channel-by-channel approach. And we see that all the time, across email, mobile, web, across social. So we're seeing that. So even if that is you, you're not on your own, but how do you figure out how to break those silos down? We'll have a look at that shortly as well. So here we go. Here's the main business benefits of understanding customer journeys. Why do people spend their time, And what is it that they're trying to do? Is we have this click to buy, this battle between click to buy and click to share. Well, we're seeing that the main purpose of trying to understand journeys, you're trying to increase engagement and conversion rates. But I thought it was really interesting at the bottom, you're looking at reduced marketing and cost savings, only 19%. Now, I find this fascinating because when you start looking at, you're making business cases for technology, you're trying to put in something that starts to measure customers of what they do across different places. This doesn't just require winning the hearts and minds of marketers. In many cases, that's quite easy. You want to go in the boardroom and speak to your boss or your boss's boss, especially when you're trying to get budget, certainly if you're trying to get budget from a financial director or a CFO. This requires trying to make those business cases. So we'll look at that a little bit later on. But one thing that I see consistently across boardrooms that I go and speak to when marketers have problems and they don't have the biggest budgets that they need and they want more, they're going in with these ROI strategies trying to get people to buy more stuff because they're trying to acquire more and more customers. And they may be bonused on leads, and that is fine. But often it takes a long time to figure out what ROI is, because you've got to prove that maybe over months or years. You can prove cost savings very, very quickly. And yet very, very few marketers are doing that. And often that's the quickest way to get more budget. How much did it make? How much did it save? Marketers need to focus more on how they figure out those reductions in marketing and advertising costs. I think for me, that's one of the biggest battlegrounds that we're seeing. And we're seeing here, this is exactly why, you're looking at those budgets for understanding customer journeys. The problem comes up time and time again, no, there's no budget. Well, of course there's not. It's not that there's no money. It's just that you've not proved the value of what it is that you're doing. You don't understand lifetime value, for example, but you've not put all the pieces in place to be able to understand how should you go and impress your CFO and your CEO with a business case around the value that it can add. And it can't be reach and impressions. It can't be I'm going to get you another 1 million likes, because you don't know the economic value of what that is. So it kind of creates this place where marketers need to be a little bit smarter about the way they're going in. This figure above, it's showing that while executives are largely able to get hold of the funds to map their customer journeys, for the most part, they're kind of going cap in hand to different departments and trying to siphon off little bits here and little bits there, and it might be customer service, it might be sales. 34% of beginners can't even get funding. This goes back to business priorities, getting the right skills. So to get this on the table, to get customer journeys to work properly across the organizations, we need to learn how to go in with proof points. And we need to go in with cost savings or with ROI modeling that is credible, that's actually going to show and prove economic value. And this leads nicely into, when you're looking at the analytics, you're looking at how you try and make those cases for, the bigger budgets to go and buy better technologies, to do more creative, to go and reach out in more channels or have more customer service people respond on social, for example. You've got to put technology in place. You've got to figure out where the data is. You've got to make sense of it. So we was asking people within this research, what data sources are you using to understand the customer journeys? And the thing that we saw, and I expected it to be weighted this way. I didn't expect it to be weighted as heavily as it was. But the majority of people are still using free tools. 80%, it's clear that most of them are happy to take the path of least resistance to understanding customer behavior. They're making use of free or cheap tools, to try and measure campaign success. And as we all know, there's very limited data available. You can't go deep on the insights and the analytics often with the free apps. And you're seeing down towards the bottom as well. Mobile app analytics is only 24%. We'll look at mobile apps in a second. Data from connected devices. Now, fair enough, this is still reasonably new. We just said by 2020, there's going to be 1 million devices connected to the internet every single hour. That's getting faster and faster. It's already starting. We've seen with the rate of data growing at the ridiculous rate that it is. This is where marketers need to be paying some attention as well. At the moment, only 9% taking data from connected devices. What does that mean? And what does that mean for your brand? Whether that's, a hub, whether that's a smart home, whether you're looking at connected devices like Nest, your Philips, and you've got connected toothbrushes, or you're looking at connected cars, whatever that is, understanding the data from those connected devices, again, is one of the huge opportunities that marketers haven't even started to look at yet. And they're struggling. We're seeing that the beginners are struggling to make sense of any of their data. The majority, as you can see here, struggling to understand basic customer needs and behavior. And also, you're seeing a huge amount can't predict customer needs and behavior either. It's no good just having these marketing automation systems in place. And it's no good in some cases trying to have predictive marketing that might be a very basic algorithm for next best action or next best product recommendation. Really what we should be looking at is not predictive analytics, it's prescriptive. Fantastic, give me the data about what's likely to happen next, but what should I do with the data that I've just been given? Where's the best place that I should take that, and should it be on a different channel, and is there a greater cost saving? For example, if I'm looking at mobile push or SMS, should I be going back to email? Is that still a fundamental? Should I be looking at my mobile response? We should know the answers to all of these things. And in the back of your mind, don't just think because we've got this in a slide or because somebody stands on a stage and tells you this is a statistic and this is where you should. Only you know where you should be spending your time and money. And only you guys know which is the channel that you'll be spending the most time on. So you should never listen to anyone that says, don't have a Snapchat strategy, you should drop everything on Facebook. Email is dead. No, email is everything. If you know deep-rooted analytics, exactly what your customers are doing, we're going to look at an example in just a second, then you will know exactly where to spend that money. And it's a 120-year-old quote. But the old Wanamaker quote, 50% of my advertising didn't work, just don't know which half. We still see that time and time again. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen, that you're not wasting your money? It all comes down to data, and it all comes down to understanding your data. You're seeing it again here. I know I'm driving home the same point, but this is basic stuff, understanding the basic needs of customers and exactly what it is that they're doing. Marketing automation, hugely important. Lookalike modeling, hugely important. Not enough people having a look at that. Not enough people having a look at that. I've got one audience over here. I might not necessarily have their personal data. So how can I look at audiences like that? There was a great example of a big brand I was speaking to recently, big technology brand, and they had everything in silos. Their data lived in separate places, and they had analytics that was tracking email. They're pushing out a lot of emails. They're trying to optimize that and increase conversion rates. And then you've got, social advertising. We're putting Facebook ads out, and then they're hoping to get some traction from that. That looked a little bit more attractive because the numbers were that much bigger, as you would expect on Facebook. But then, the rates that they were getting from each of them were just very, very siloed, and also they couldn't track those customer journeys across different channels. What they started to do was to start to do lookalike models and match up some of that data. They started to look at of the people that have clicked on a Facebook ad, who actually received an email and clicked on that. Of the people that saw a Facebook ad but maybe didn't click on it, how many of those people may have received an email, and did they click on it or did they not? And just by matching just those two data sets together alone, they saw an increase in sales of 22%. And it's just, I know it's basic stuff. I know a lot of you guys know this already, but this is the early stages of lookalike modeling and marketing automation, even though we've been doing it for quite a while. Even though technologies like ours are fantastic at doing this, we're still seeing that lack of maturity in the marketplace. We're still seeing those silos. There was a really great stat a CMO told me the other day. I was asking him about his sales and marketing data. He shared with me a piece of research that he'd just read, and it was 88% of enterprise companies don't even share their own customer data between their own sales and marketing departments. You talk about silos. Most companies still aren't sharing their own customer data between their own departments. It's no wonder that we get ourselves into a mess and that it's incredibly difficult for us to do what it is that we do. We're still looking at first-party data, and that is fine. The majority of marketers are spending their time there, but they're not spending enough time on looking and analyzing second or third-party data. We're not looking at that at all. And people are making emotional decisions just on that first-party data, but they're not verifying it. We mentioned personalization versus personification before. We're going to look at dark social shortly. But it's this idea that it's quite possible you may be only analyzing a data set and making very big decisions on what is actually a very, very small percentage of your customers. And the significant majority, which would drive an entirely different strategy, lives in a completely different data set. We're still seeing marketers have this incredibly siloed approach. And when you download the report and you have a look at the methodology, you'll see this in a lot more detail. The reason I like this, and it's really good that we're having these conversations because we skim over them a little bit too fast sometimes, is this isn't new. I know that you know that it's not new. There's when I was working with Starbucks years ago, they had this idea of the 5 W's, and it was really basically talking about the same stuff. It's clear from this research that we've not got it right yet, but the 5 W's is just the fundamentals of what you should measure. In 2017, there's over 550 different marketing metrics that the average B2C marketer can measure. Over 550 different metrics. But what I saw years ago, and it's probably advice that is almost still as relevant today, is when you look about just measuring what matters most, if you just did the 5 W's, you wouldn't go far wrong. Who are my customers? What are they saying? Why did they say these things? Where did those conversations take place and when? Who, what, why, where, and when. You imagine just having those 5 data sets on a dashboard and having insights regularly fed back, even in real time, if you can have a command center. If you are really brave and you want to bring IBM in to have a cognitive command center, obviously we'd love to help you with that. But just to try and understand, those 5 W's is really where most brands are going wrong. They don't even know the first 2 W's. There's some huge shifts taking place. So whilst we are saying there's fundamentals that we're not doing right, and we haven't been doing them right for years, this is the disclaimer, I guess. This is where we start to get into slightly different space because it's not business as usual, and we shouldn't think it is. This isn't how do we do the things we should have been doing 3 years ago. There are basics we should put in place. Of course we should. But one of the predictions that I saw from Forrester is backed up by Gartner as well in an IT report they did in December. By the end of 2020, 30% of browsing behavior will not even involve a screen. Going to involve some type of a device, whether that's an Amazon Echo, you're speaking to Alexa, could be Cortana, could be Siri, could be Jibo, if you've seen the first social robot that's going to come out officially later on this year. We're going to be talking to devices, so we need to understand voice and natural language processing. We need to understand sentiment and tone analyzers. And these are going to be the new data sets, within connected products that we need to look at as well. So there is going to be the 5 W's, but it's not going to be just measuring, email, mobile, social web. It's not even going to be looking at TV, radio, billboard, press. It's going to be looking at voice. May even, goodness forbid, look at how do we recognize faces. We've got facial recognition APIs within Watson that we're playing with at the moment. Starbucks have been testing facial recognition when you walk in a store. It can look at your face, understand who you are, make the drink. You don't even need to say anything. Get to the end of the queue, you can swipe your phone, you pick up your drink, it's automatically paid, you can scoot out. You may have seen at the end of last year, I'm sure, Amazon Fresh. You can go and walk in grocery stores, pick stuff off the shelf and just walk straight out again. There's this huge shift. But this is where I like to bring it back down to basics as well. Whilst we are looking at these big shifts, and we're looking at some fantastic case studies, what was backed up in our research, and it's the research that we saw with eMarketer at the beginning of last year as well, email is still the most significant channel for customer journeys. I've seen that from the customers that I spoke to at IBM. They're building out those customer journeys. Email is still the cornerstone. It's still that cornerstone of understanding what people are doing across the different channels. But how do we build the trust first? We've seen social access at the bottom. People used to log in with social networks all the time. We used to get all of their data, and people started to realize that actually maybe they don't want to log in with a social network. They just want to play, chat to their friends and see photos. That's dropping, and it's getting faster and faster, and it's getting less and less of a deal. Email is still quite big. So I hope you're all with me. I'm going to fly through these rest slides really, really quickly because it's 22. We've got about 12 to 15 minutes, and if you want to have some Q&A, I'd love to get into that afterwards. But, this is really kind of what we're coming down to. We've got to try and join these dots between the different channels. We're still seeing a very transactional approach. We're still seeing tracking codes and coupons. What we're not seeing enough of is a slightly different approach to the way that we should engage with customers. People don't want to give as much of their data. There's a great case study. You're welcome to go and have a look at it online. You can search it. It's called Macy's on Call. It was built with IBM Watson, but essentially what was happening is without an app, without asking people to download anything, you can just go straight onto their website and you can just ask the phone a question. Imagine if you could just talk to it as well and just say, where are the shoes? And the device, the mobile responsive site, is going to show you exactly where the shoes are, and it's going to direct you towards them. It's going to provide a slightly different customer experience. I was talking to a store manager yesterday about customer journeys, and one of the things that he was saying, he said, I don't need a complicated strategy, massive department store, big retailer. He said, if I just got somebody to log into Wi-Fi on my store and check a football score, that would be the start of a great customer journey for me, because I'm adding some value to them and I've not asked them for anything yet. Then if I've given them a good experience and my Wi-Fi is fast and they've got the score, maybe then they'll want to get an offer or push notification. Maybe they want to sign up to a newsletter or an email if they get something afterwards. But you've got to give some kind of value first. And who is it that owns this? Often it's a mixture of different departments, marketing departments, maybe a little bit less so. We're seeing, 24% marketing departments. Like I said at the top, this is about marketing speaking to lots of other different departments at the same time. I mean, I joke that marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. But really what I mean by that is this is as much a part of sales and HR and operations and finance as it is marketing, as we go out trying to make our business cases. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing IT bottlenecks are a problem. These are big organizational barriers. We're seeing lacks of leadership, lack of marketers with the right skills. And this requires us to go in with that data when we go and make our compelling cases, not just, like I said, based upon the traditional marketing metrics of reach and impressions and all that sort of stuff. How do we go in with some solid metrics that the business is going to respect? And we're seeing that across all the people that we spoke to. It's still one of the biggest problems that they're dealing with. So let me spend a couple of minutes just talking about this idea of dark social. We asked what the technical barriers were. Now, if there's one big technological shift that I see as being a huge problem, it's dark social. This played out in this slide. This was the one that staggered me the most, probably. We looked at acquisition and retention before, and I knew that was going to be quite big. But this idea of dark social, this idea that, dark social is really this idea of people on messaging apps. People are looking at WhatsApp and Snapchat and WeChat and Line. 88% of conversations in 2017, data was done at the end of 2016, I'm sure it's roughly the same, 88% are on private messaging apps. They're not on public social networks anymore like they used to. So it means all of those conversations are invisible. Facebook's about 15%, Twitter's about 8%. So you might be measuring public data from Twitter for your brand. It might only be 8% of the conversation, even less. The majority are on private messaging apps. Now, if you look back to that slide here, this idea that the majority of customer conversations are now private, and as marketers we can't see them, only 6% of marketers are aware of that. That means that 94% of marketers don't think that this is a problem. That is huge. Phenomenally, that's one of the biggest problems I think that we've got. When you start looking at the social networks, you can see a couple of the messaging apps here, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Snapchat. Huge, huge problem. The fact that only 6% think that that's a problem, we need to give such a compelling user experience that somebody would want to go and spend some time with us on one of those messaging apps, because once you open up that conversation, of course we're going to have a single view. We're going to be able to see a lot more interesting things about customers, but they need to open up the conversation with us first. We need to have that Uber-style one-click experience. Of course we do. We want to build on Facebook Messenger for brands. We've got some integrations we're working on with WeChat and Line at IBM and having huge successes across that. But the fact that the majority of marketers don't see dark social as a problem, I think is huge. And if that goes for you as well, if you're unfamiliar with the term, or you still don't know how to market to customers on messaging apps privately and respectfully as well, I might add, I suggest that that's maybe one of the big takeaways that you take away from this webinar. I think that's going to be huge. And for me, that changes everything with the way we should think about stuff. I joked at the top, world's changing very, very, very fast, much quicker than most of us think. This, you can see here the priorities selected for customer experience. We're trying to look at customer journey mapping, number one, personalization, segmentation, automation, predictive modeling. You're trying to see where we're spending our time and our efforts, but make sure that you're looking in the right places. and you're not just getting seduced by the old stuff. And it shouldn't just be what's my, social media strategy going to be, because it feels like that's weak and we've got a massive audience we should go and sell to on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Absolutely not. Maybe that you think Snapchat could be a great way of spending $750,000 a day. It may be that you shouldn't need any of that at all, because you're one of the 88% of companies that don't share sales and marketing data internally. So maybe you should focus on the fundamentals first, figure out what those customer journeys are based around email, and start having a look at that. There's a great stat that we've got here. Let me just show you this one. This is some insights that I saw, and this is one of my favorite people in the industry. I love Brian Solis. In his book X, he was saying recently about customer experience. We saw this backed up in our research as well, so it's good to try and emphasize this. 90% of mobile customers are often not sure which brand to choose. So the majority of them go with the one that offers the best mobile experience. Let me just give you a quick example of what this might look like. And I'm not going to talk you through this. I encourage you to go and have a look at this on your own, and you can make your own mind up if you think this is a great experience. thenorthface.com/XPS. What this is an e-commerce website that is powered by Watson using natural language processing, the AI power behind Watson, to try and provide the best experience within a digital domain. The best experience possible based upon what you may have expected in a store. You go in a North Face store, if any of you guys have been in, you'll see the way that they recruit their staff. They really know their stuff. They've been to the places, they're adventurers. They're not just going to go and sell you some gear and sell you the right coat. They're going to talk to you about the place that they're going to. Now, the reason that North Face did this, there was a couple of different reasons, but they were looking at some huge trends. Now, one of them, for example, was the fact that the majority of people don't want to give data to brands anymore. We've seen this last year. I've certainly seen this consistently with people I've been chatting to. 55% of consumers across the US and the UK say that advertisers should not be collecting any data whatsoever. Absolutely not. 55% of consumers don't want to give us their data. How on earth could we provide a great experience with them? I encourage you to go and have a look on the North Face website, because it's a perfect example of an AI powering a website to make product recommendations. And when we looked before at personalization versus personification, and personification is this idea of how do I give you the right message, the right product at the right time when I don't know information? This is basically what we're trying to do with North Face. And one of the reasons that they've done that on a website rather than do that on a mobile app, for example, mobile websites, mobile responsive sites are much easier to manage. We're seeing a big trend. 1 in 5 major retailers by 2020 will abandon their mobile apps. 20% of brands are going to drop their apps. Too expensive to develop, too costly to maintain. A lot of people just don't want to download stuff anymore. 80% of consumers are probably using only 5 apps. And even though people download hundreds and hundreds of apps, they don't use them. There's about 85% of all the apps in the App Store don't even exist on the list. They're called zombies, when they don't appear on a list. 60% of all the apps in the Apple App Store have never been downloaded, ever, not even once. So what does all this stuff mean? We'll start to wrap this up, and we're coming to, I have 2 or 3 minutes left. We look at this idea of AI, and really what it's coming down to. You see North Face, you'll see, we're going to just finish off on some ideas about metrics. We see the way that stuff is moving. We see the fact that we need voice recognition. We've got to be more intelligent. We need prescriptive and predictive marketing. AIs are great at doing that, especially when you've got big audiences. You don't want to just have 5 different personas you market to. If you've got 1 million customers, you should have 1 million different customer journeys, every one of them completely unique. How do you have 1 million journeys completely unique in real time? Well, of course you need technology to do that. Essentially why we're in business. That's why we do what we do. But this is not about artificial intelligence. It's a great quote from our CEO, Ginny Rometty. She said it's man and machine, not man versus machine. We call that augmented intelligence, how marketers are working with machines. So let me just finish on one of the other key stats that we were looking at. I've mentioned before about trying to measure stuff. It's one of my favorite people, one of the original data scientists from back in the 60s, W. Edward Deming. You want to Google him. He said some of the most quotable things ever said by a business person. Fantastic person. I'm surprised that more people don't know him. He coined a phrase that you probably do know. You can't manage what you don't measure. So right at the end of the report, what you'll see as you flick through it is we looked at what are the metrics that marketers care about in 2016. And we saw, this surprised me incredible amount. I would have expected, based upon acquisition versus loyalty, you would expect, wouldn't you, that ROI is going to be the biggest one. And it wasn't. ROI is actually very, very small. You'll see it just there hovering around the middle. NPS was the biggest one by far. Net Promoter Score, measuring customer satisfaction. How do we make sure that our customers are happy? And how do we know over time whether or not we've increased lifetime value? Let me just recommend this quick book to you if you've not read it before. It's a couple of years old. This was one of the best books that's ever been written on lifetime value of a customer. Shows you exactly how to work out lifetime value. Talks to you about how you shouldn't just look at influencers. Look at the people that hate you and turn them from detractors into people that are just neutral, people that are just passive. And actually you show that you spend a lot more time and you'll get much more money turning people that hate you into people that don't care than sometimes trying to get people who do love you, trying to either recommend, turn them into evangelists or cheerleaders or increase their ROI. Fantastic book. Fred Reichheld is the guy that actually invented the NPS score. So brilliant, brilliant book that I highly recommend. So last couple of slides. What are the metrics that companies are using to measure their success? This really, and I like to back up just to make sure that the metrics that I'm seeing from our research actually matched what other people are seeing in the industry as well. And it was absolutely true. End of November, eMarketer, we're seeing engagement, traffic reach. We're looking at softer metrics within marketing are still being measured. I like the idea that we're looking towards NPS instead of ROI, but, and this is a book from 2011, and this is something, you haven't got it in your library, you should absolutely read it. This is one of those books every marketer should know inside out. It's not just a social media book. It talks about exactly how you measure ROI. You want to go in a boardroom equipped with the best business case study to get more budget, and we've seen in our research that people are really struggling with that. This is one of the best books you could possibly read. Olivier Blanchard, he's a brand builder on Twitter. He talks about exactly how you measure ROI without using all of the fluffy stuff, and it's certainly not without trying to put economic values to Facebook likes and all that kind of stuff. It's how do you measure it properly. So everybody, thank you very much. Really wrapping all of that up, we're looking at, this is about customer experience. It's trying to provide the most compelling customer experience. We're seeing that 37% of marketers still can't measure the lifetime value of their customers. I find that quite staggering considering the fact that technology makes it very easy for us to do that now. The majority of marketers still don't know how to do that. One of the biggest challenges, that should be in one of your top 5 in your to-do list. If you don't know the lifetime value of each type of your customer, you should be able to figure that out. Obviously, increasing that lifetime value is going to be tied very, very closely to your loyalty program. 7 times cheaper keep a customer than get a new one. It's going to be tied very closely to your NPS score as well. So that leaves the session. I hope that all sounds okay. We do have a few minutes for questions if there are any. If not, I would like to show you one slide in a second, which is a beautiful thing that you should take away and learn from. John, do we have anything?
Absolutely. We have a couple great questions. And let me pull that up real quick. Do you see a big difference in cost to retain versus cost to acquire by vertical? For example, CPG versus finance versus healthcare. Is there a difference from that cost perspective based on vertical?
Oh my goodness. I don't think I've ever been on a webinar where I didn't know straight away the answer to a question like that. I don't know if you've got an opinion on that, John. I think proportionally, it's, the percentage split is going to be even. The cost of a financial services customer, for example, they might be spending $110 per person to acquire them on Google. If you're a gaming brand, you might be spending $100 to get someone in a gaming book. Proportionally with the amount they're going to spend, of course it's going to be that much higher, but, the lifetime value is going to be bigger as well. Goes into that a lot in the Ultimate Question 2.0. But as far as the specifics, that is a fantastic question I would need to think about. Do you have an opinion on that, John?
My opinion is it really depends. And I've worked in the insurance industry, I've worked in SaaS, I've worked in tech, and it really, I think, it's based on the product and really the cost point of the product. When you're dealing with more complex sales, obviously there's longer sales cycles. So what you want to look at from that perspective is how long is your sales cycle? How long does it take to nurture that sale to happen, or the acquisition of that new business to happen. So I'd say I would say definitely there's a difference between the verticals, but at the same time, it's really dependent on the product and your sales cycle. Hopefully that answers the question. And again, that's just my opinion. But
you mentioned CPG as well, though, and I mean it's interesting. You look at CPG and you don't know who the customers are because you're selling via second, third, fourth party people. You know, someone like a Procter and Gamble or a Unilever. You know, they've got 2 billion transactions a day and about 400 brands. They don't know who their end customers are. Whereas if you're a financial services brand and it's a high ticket value, high net worth individual, or you can see what that product is going to be worth, you might know everything about that customer. You know, you might be able to look at demographic profile. You can see 4,000 things about that customer. CPG doesn't have that. Now, the battleground for me in the middle of this, and I've seen this working with people like Goldman Sachs and working with the Unilevers of the world, the consistent bit that I'm seeing pulled together, obviously the lifetime values are dramatically different. It might be $37 in one case and $527 in the other case. But what they're now starting to do is track emotions. You know, one of the things that we have, you guys can check this out if you search ibm.com/cognitive. You can look at how we can track emotions within customer journeys, even tracking things like sentiment and emojis and natural language processing, the way that people talk. What I'm seeing now is that when brands are trying to look at those relationships and those audiences, they don't just want to look at what they've said and the demographic information that may live within a CRM. It's going to be, what's the emotional intent of this person? What mood are they in? What were they looking at 10 or 15 minutes ago, and how might that change purchase intent or buying behavior? And if you're, you know, whether you're buying a financial product or whether you're going and buying a new deodorant, you still make emotional decisions. So what I'm seeing, and I know it's a very kind of strange roundabout way of answering a question, is actually that's the shift. You know, people are looking at the emotional side of building in that extra layer. We call it, in fact, let me just flick to the screen here, this one that we went back to. What that's a picture of is a cognitive command center. It's the one we use for the Toronto Raptors. But what it's also able to do is not just measure lifetime values, not just measuring social engagement and CRM. That might be looking at images on Instagram and measuring the intent behind them or the emotions of why you posted it, looking at the visual graphics. You know, so I mean, it's this kind of thinking that we're seeing some of the smartest marketers look towards now, and then try and tie that back to lifetime value. But you can only do that when obviously you've broken down those silos and it's all in one place.
Perfect. I like it. So I'm gonna throw another question out there for you, Jeremy. What are some of the biggest factors causing organizations inability to understand the quote unquote customer journey?
So we're talking about the obstacles in stopping us, allowing us to understand that?
I believe so. They said biggest factors, so I'm going to assume what are the obstacles with the inability to understand the customer journey. Okay.
I mean, there's a really long answer to that, and it almost doesn't do it justice just having it quickly. Let's look at two opposite ends of the spectrum. If you're an SME, you're a small brand, an SMB, it may be that you've just not got the budget in place to measure it. You know, there was some research that was looking at co-founders and startup CEOs, and 72% said the most important thing, this was an IBM study a couple of years ago, 72% said the most important thing was to have a single view of a customer. Now, what we see from this research is that people can't measure the customer journey and they can't join the dots when they're those beginner brands. So the early ones haven't got the budget, the technology's in place and it's siloed, so they don't know what that is because they haven't got the budget in place, even though they're saying that's their number one priority when you speak to their CEO. Now, if you go to the opposite extreme, look at, say, some of the biggest IBM customers, and these guys are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, you find the complete opposite. You find that they've got so much technology, and a lot of those legacy systems have been there for such a long time. Then you have the opposite problem where things don't talk to each other. So if you want to Google the term, search dark MarTech. It's the Scott Brinker term. We flashed it up briefly at the beginning. Dark MarTech is this idea of people that have got too much technology and it doesn't speak to each other. So you don't necessarily need those 55 different products and system integrators and agencies to piece it together. You may just need 2 or 3. You may just need a small handful of data sets. But the fact is you've got too much data coming in from too many different places and it's unstructured and you can't make sense of it. So the 80% of all that data that exists in the world that's unstructured that we mentioned before, only 5% of it has been analyzed. So that's the biggest problem for me,
That's
smaller companies,
that's huge.
it's about 0.5%. It's huge.
Well, and I think I want to push one slide real quick. The whole thing here around Starbucks, who, what, where, when, why, and understanding the customer and what conversations they're happening. I think you hit on this perfectly. So that's why I wanted to push that slide, just because I think a lot of those obstacles are, at times we as companies totally forget to ask these questions. And I always go, what's the most important question? I think it's why. Why are we doing something? Why is someone taking an action? Why would they want to interact with us? And understanding that why will lead you down the path of who, what, where, and when. So I always start with why. But that slide really hit home, and that's, I think, a brilliant, just a piece to always be asking yourself, especially from a marketer's perspective. Now, I will end with this last question. Do you think cognitive or AI will replace what we do as marketers?
The provocative question, is automation and intelligence, artificial intelligence, going to take our jobs? It's the stuff of science fiction movies, isn't it? When we start seeing some of these technologies kind of coming in, you look at a technology that learns, any machine learning technology. If you think about that in principle and you just play that out to its logical conclusion, in theory, that's going to learn and take on a life of its own. So, of course it would. Of course it would replace those jobs. But let me just preface what I mean by that. You could look back to the Model T when the car production line was first automated. People said exactly the same thing. They ended up having a much higher quality of life. The cost of cars halved. All of a sudden, people could afford them. They were more mobile. The quality of life was infinitely better. But at the time, they thought it was the worst thing in the world. Nobody wanted cars, did they? They wanted faster horses. The thing is with marketing, when you look at so much of our jobs is mundane and is operational, or it could be automated, whether that's dashboards or building campaigns or trying to segment different audiences, understand of the 10 million, where they've gone and what they've done, those 5 Ws. Of course, all of that can be automated. So anyone in those jobs, fair enough, their workload is going to be a lot less. But what will happen, and Kevin Kelly talks about this in his book, The Inevitable. The Inevitable is one of the best books I read last year. People go through that process. They're scared for their jobs, but then they're going to find themselves in a place where they're actually instead doing something more rewarding, they're happier, and they're getting better paid. So let me point you to this, and we'll finish up. We've gone over by a couple of minutes, and thanks for anyone that's still with us. This is the best piece of advice I could give you for all the topics we've discussed today. If you only do a couple of things, if you were to read the new blog, and this is a blatant pitch, but it is actually, there's a lot of genuinely brilliant stuff on this site, ibm.com/marketing. We have 15 new posts on this every single day, some great thought leaders about these topics. Bloomberg Technology, they do a magazine show every single night, 45 minutes, biggest changes in tech, and the podcast from Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. Download it from iTunes. It's the best 28 minutes you could possibly listen to once a week. Covers all the sorts of stuff we've chatted about today. So thank you very much, everybody. I know it was fast and furious, and we covered a lot of ground, but hopefully that was useful and informative.
Well, Jeremy, I'd like to say thank you again. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you've all enjoyed the webinar. And thank you for all the great questions. And as we mentioned, if we didn't get to your questions, we will follow up with each of you by email. If you'd like to see our product in action, we would encourage you to visit silverpop.com and view our 5-minute demo at any time. Also, on our website in the resources section, there is more information about future webinars, recordings from previous webinars, as well as a number of white papers and blog entries on a wide variety of digital marketing topics. So with that, thank you all again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.